Number 8 of the books that I've read for the Great American Read is The Chronicles of Narnia by C.S. Lewis, a 7 book series from 1950 to 1956. And as someone whose own first book took 2 years to write, those numbers really blow my mind. And I can only imagine he spent every spare second of that time writing these things to get them out at that pace, more than one a year. Now, this series really is one of my cherished childhood memories because my mother would read a bunch of these classic books to my brother and I when we were little kids, and one of them was The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, which I later found out was actually the first time she'd read it too. So we got to have this experience together of learning one of the great stories ever written. And it really is that. And it wouldn't think so by just how it came about, because like I indicated in the last video, it had kind of a wobbly path to get to where it is now. Lewis was raised a Roman Catholic, and then he lapsed and became an atheist by the time he was in college. And then he met J.R.R. Tolkien, who was a very devout Roman Catholic and was quite disturbed by Lewis being an atheist, even if they did become friends. And eventually he convinced Lewis, who went back to being Catholic and was very religious himself from then on, and wrote a bunch of like apologetics for Christianity. And he also wrote one book about a little girl finding a magical world and a bunch of people that teach her about Christian values, which she intended for just one person, his goddaughter Lucy. And Lucy apparently liked it a lot, and he was convinced to put it into mass publication because a bunch of other people would like it. And so we have one of the great fantasy stories ever from all of that happening at once. So, how does it hold up? Really, really well. Now, I say this as someone who has never been very religious myself, but there is so much great stuff throughout all of these books, and I still occasionally go back to them. There's these great characters doing great stories with all kinds of dialogue between them that is just witty and fun and still engaging in a way that children's literature often struggles to be, because it's another one of these things where you're not talked down to. There are dark things that happen and they're not automatically fixed at the end, even if one of the characters is pretty much God. And literally in this case, given how this thing started. Now, all of that really did want to go over my head reading these as a kid because I just thought they were a fun story. But as the more I go back to them, the more I realize there is so much great stuff in there. And there's this big controversy even about what order to read them in, because the order they were published were not the order they were written, and they're still not the chronological order either way. Although that last one is something no one wants. And I was lucky enough to have Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe read to me before that, because the edition I picked up happened to be one of the ones which label The Magician's Nephew, book number 6, in the proper order as book number 1, because it's a prequel that's about how Narnia was formed. And don't read it that way. There are a ton of callbacks and call forwards, whatever you want to call them, that you will only understand if you read the other books. And I am pretty grateful that I was able to sidestep that at least a bit by having read the first book first. Now, there's so much in here that really I can't cover it all now. There are 7 books, even if they are fairly short, and they are, despite being made in the 50s, they do expect you to remember things and pick up on them, even if they come 2 or 3 or even the whole 7 books later. And that was really gratifying to read because I was just starting at the time to realize that these stories existed that expected you to remember this stuff for that long. And if you do, it's very rewarding because you feel like you did accomplish something when this character shows up out of nowhere in the book you're reading now, but if you remember them from way back earlier in the series, you have this experience of like saying, "Yeah, I know who that is, and I remember him from before," and that was a big thing in getting me to just realize how rewarding reading itself could be. So I'm also very thankful for these books for that one. Now, they're not perfect, and the last book in particular has one very notorious plot point that even as like a small child, I just thought, well, this is bullshit. I won't give away what it is. You can just look around, and Neil Gaiman even wrote a short story correcting it, which I do recommend if you are one of the people who was bothered by it, because it really does help just to know that another great writer also has this kind of problem with these things. And it's still enough, uh, like it's a minor enough plot point that it doesn't really ruin anything for me the way it has for some others, unfortunately, from what I've read online. But, you know, things like that are in there, and you should be prepared going in just so you don't get smacked in the face with them and just have to think, wait a minute, where did this come from? So I'd definitely check these out. I can't imagine many people exist that haven't read them, but if you're one of them, what are you waiting for? They're all out there, easy to find, and you will not regret it. Trust me on this one. Up next, we come to my personal favorite book of all time, an author that I share a birthday with, and it's a very intimidating book, but you will definitely not regret the time you spent with it, and that is The Count of Monte Cristo.